All right. Good evening, good afternoon, or whatever. Who knows what time you're watching or listening? I guess I think about those who might be watching live here on YouTube and all these other platforms. I have a really smart guy joining us today to talk about the most important issue I think that we're all thinking about and trying to learn as much as we can. Few people that are better to talk to than my guest now. Professor Thanassis Cambanis is how you say his name. I think I got it close.
Pretty
Professor
close. Cambanis.
Cambanis, it's great to see you. I've been reading all your stuff. I hope everybody goes over and checks out all of your work and a really interesting organization, the Century Foundation. Just talk a little bit about the organization that you've been working with for a while, because I was digging into the work that you guys do and all the experts that you have over there. Really good stuff. Tell us a little bit about that.
Century was founded in 1919, actually, by a progressive department store magnate, Edward Filene, who believed in equal wages. Yep, Filene's Basement, that guy. He believed in equal wages for workers, and he believed in peace over war, supported the League of Nations, was a big supporter of the New Deal, did a lot of promotional work for FDR in the New Deal time, and left this legacy of these beautiful ideals that we mostly honor in the breach in America today.
It's really interesting organization and obviously history. And you yourself have written a couple of books, articles everywhere, appeared all over the place, but you've been talking about and living in the Middle East and covering our kind of forever wars for a really long time. Talk to us a little bit about where you lived and what you covered.
Sure. And let me just take one more beat to plug the fantastic work of my colleagues at Century. So Century today has a really breadth of people who work on progressive issues, a lot of things like educational access, discrimination in healthcare, affordability crisis. And then my team, Century International, is a group of people who are mostly based in the Middle East. We do long-term deep field work, and the whole genesis of our work is to say to American policymakers, if you're going to muck around in places like Iraq or the Gulf or Lebanon or Israel Palestine, you should know what the impact of your policies is for people who actually live there. And our researchers are people who actually live there. For a long time, I was one of them. I spent most of my adult life in Iraq, Cairo, Jerusalem, Beirut, and some in Damascus. And that's my perspective is shaped by being an American in these regions that are real places full of real people who have agency, and at the same time often end up powerlessly on the receiving end of really crappy decisions, either made in Washington or in Tehran or in Riyadh or one of these capitals.
We in America are so apathetic about the Middle East, about Arabs, Muslim world, what the difference is between, Arabs and Persians, Iran and Iraq, Sunni and Shia. We hear all this terminology. There's so much diversity in that part of the world. Like you said, you've lived and covered all these different countries. How do you talk to an American about the region, specifically now as we have stepped back into it, which is just shocking and crazy that we're here talking about this today? But how do you talk to Americans about this very diverse region when we hear all different kinds of things, and then we kind of all lump them together? It's hard for Americans to understand, but also I believe we have great responsibility to understand.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we try to meet people where they are, and we try to give people grace if they don't know things, but at the same time, we need to hold people accountable who dehumanize others, right? So that's the kind of starting point. When you ask me how do I talk to Americans, it depends on what they're asking, because some Americans are genuinely curious. They have fears maybe of terrorism or fears of the other, but they are also curious, and they understand that let's say Palestinians are real human beings, equal human beings. Now there are other folks who don't think of Arabs and Muslims and Middle Easterners as fully vested human beings, and I've kind of run out of ways to try and bridge the gap with those folks. I mean, it became really apparent during the war in Gaza and the war crimes and eventually the clear genocide unfolding there, that there are folks for whom no Arab life, no Palestinian life actually has the same value as an American life or white life. And that that's a hard one to talk through, because our shared our shared humanity needs to be a starting point for discussion about, like, do we need to be bombing the hell out of Iran right now? Well, if you don't think of the Iranians who are dying under this bombardment as fully vested people, then you and I are going to have a difficulty having an
Yeah,
exchange of
yeah,
views.
and it's so true. And I didn't want to believe that. I kind of almost wanted to say that, but we don't see them as human. And it's very easy to dehumanize folks whose culture you don't share, whose culture and history you know very little about. Although, when we're talking about Iran and Iraq, it almost feels like if you don't know anything, where have you been as an American? We've been tied up with these countries our entire lives. When I saw that this girls' school had been bombed, I mean, I haven't stopped thinking about that. Just, just that. When I think about the humanity of it all, not to mention the fact that several different cities in Iran have been bombed in the last couple days, and Americans have no idea what that's like. I mean, I was in New York on 9/11, but that wasn't the same for a lot of different reasons. I think it's important that we talk about the humanity, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. And I just wanted to kind of highlight just how I've been thinking about it. Anything to add there?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, not to detour too heavily, but I think it's important for sort of grounding the conversation in our understanding of the Middle East as like a real place with real people living in it. I raised my kids in Beirut. They went to preschool, elementary school there, and it's a rich, fun city. There were a million plus Syrian refugees there at the time in a war raging 90 miles away in Syria, but it's a normal functioning place, like most places, even in times of war. And every time I'd come home, people would say, "Oh my God, aren't you scared being there in Beirut?" What they thought it was still 1982. That Americans were getting kidnapped by Hezbollah and taken with a bag over their head, or buildings getting blown up in downtown Beirut. And of course, that was true in 1982. Hasn't been true for decades. And it's really important that we have some, I think a little bit of humility, but also a lot of, like, let's do the work. We're the most, as Americans, we're citizens of the most powerful country in the world, and we make a mistake, 100,000 Iraqis die. And those of us who worked there or served there in the armed forces or in the diplomatic corps or in the humanitarian space. Maybe someone like me, I continue to go to Iraq multiple times a year to this day. We're still watching. Most Americans stopped watching a long time ago, and we can't blame them morally necessarily, but we did that. We caused the harm, and then decades later, the Iraqi state is laboring under the burden of all these militias and kleptocrats who are misgoverning their country and robbing them blind, and often working together with the worst elements of the Iranian regime. And that all is happening because of a series of events we triggered. And that kind of leads us. I don't want to preempt where you're about to take our conversation, but that leads us to the insane folly of where we are today with this embarking on this war of choice against Iran. We know that at a minimum, any kind of war creates a cascade of unintended consequences. So
Yes.
even the most ideal scenario, it's unpredictable. It's deadly, it's destabilizing, it's unpredictable. And that's if it goes well, all kinds of things, mostly harmful, happen that no one could have predicted. That is the one thing you can, with 100% certainty, guarantee in the event of a war or an invasion. So here we are taking on a country four times the size of Iraq when we invaded Iraq, with no plan, less planning than the bungled catastrophe and crime of the invasion of Iraq. It's astonishing to me. I mean, I expected it. I actually published a piece on,
Yeah.
I think, 2 days before the war started, warning against it because I had heard that it was coming, but I still refused to really believe that we would do something this stupid until we did it.
Yes. I can't believe we're here. I just can't believe that this is happening, that they went through with it. You wrote a piece, I guess, last year. I think it's important just to go back to because it matters so much. Yeah, back in March 23, titled "In Breaking Iraq, America Broke Itself." And you're also writing in the most recent piece about how this invasion in Iran helps contributes to the destruction of our democracy at home. Everything is connected, and people don't necessarily realize it. Make the case, though, that in breaking Iraq, America broke itself.
So, I always want to make sure I start with the most harm, which was the harm caused to the people who live in Iraq. So that that's always first and foremost in my thoughts. However, as an American, I look at what happened to our own society as a result of embarking on this forever war. So, we did a couple of things in committing to a war of folly in Iraq. We broke a generation of service members who we had serving one, two, three, sometimes four or five tours, knowing that if they survived in body, they would often come home with uh, very hard to live with maladies caused by fighting these wars, out of sight, out of political consequence, on our behalf, and we brought back the norms of a lawless battleground. So in Iraq, the Americans who were dispatched there, whether they were service members in the military or contractors or civilian overlords in any of the various bureaucracies we set up, they were told to act with impunity, indifference to the people whose lives they were controlling, and that's how we got things like the Abu Ghraib scandal, which uh, some of your listeners might be mercifully, happily too young to have lived through as adults, but where, to our undying shame as Americans, members of the military tortured Iraqi detainees, photographed them in horrifying, humiliating positions, and collected these photos as war trophies. But there were cases from the most extreme, rape of children, murder of civilians, to criminal negligence. The dismantling of the Iraqi state, the blowing up of its security apparatus, its ministries, and things from which nearly a quarter century later people are still picking up the pieces from. The men and women who did that work, the work of unmaking a society, brutalizing and humiliating people with no accountability, with impunity that was ordered, the impunity was given to them by their superior officers all the way up to the president of the United States, who themselves practiced and enjoyed that impunity. Unsurprisingly, completely predictably, these people came home. Some of them continued in service, enlisting in police departments, working in the government in other places. And no surprise, we find them in Ferguson shooting unarmed protesters. We find them in American cities shooting unarmed black civilians. We see them on January 6th breaking into the Capitol, and in other places too. Now, of course, this is not what happened to every service member, but the problem with an illegal war that's centered on impunity and abuse is that the weak links, or the folks who are have a proclivity towards brutality or predatory behavior, are supercharged and given official cover. And
Yes.
then they came back to the U.S. and were continued to be empowered in that way. And now today we have a state. We have a democratic erosion at the highest levels, in our government, where not just the president but all kinds of elected officials and civil servants do not feel accountable, do not feel bound by the law. They don't feel bound by Supreme Court decisions. They don't feel bound by any kind of morality or values-based provision. And interestingly, sorry to go on so long, but some of the most powerful voices on this debate are folks who have served, right? So you have hypocrites like, well, I shouldn't name them in order to be somewhat apolitical, but you have veterans who opposed forever wars, but now in positions of power have decided some forever wars are just fine, like
Well,
this
JD
attack on
Vance would
Iran.
probably be the most. I
I
think
think
JD Vance, who served
that
and is the vice president, who was very much outspoken against the Iran war, any invasion of Iran. So was Tulsi Gabbard and other
un,
people in the
un,
administration themselves who served.
right, until it was time to get in line behind this reckless war. But we have a lot of other folks who served, who have been very overt now, members of Congress who are veterans, who, because they risk their lives in combat zones, are able and willing to stand up to this insane orthodoxy of
Yeah.
armchair forever warriorism.
I'm actually just kind of surprised that there is. I mean, I guess it's very unpopular. I'm now talking about Iran. Very few Americans support this. It seems like we learned our lesson, at least on the forever wars, the war on terror, because of Iraq, because of Afghanistan, because of the results of those two wars, because of a generation of broken veterans. You mentioned, the things that they have to deal with, not to mention just the suicide rate, addiction, unemployment, domestic abuse, divorce. It's
These are
impossible.
long tail harms of war. These are casualties of war, as sure as if they were shot on the battlefield.
As sure as they were shot on the battlefield. I think it's a really important way of saying it. But overwhelmingly across political lines, it would seem America was against this kind of invasion. And I wonder what you think in terms of how the administration didn't even try to sell this, didn't even mention it in the State of the Union. This is not like George W. Bush's wars in the Middle East, where they sold them for a year or more. We had propaganda. This is so much different. And it's also an air war overwhelmingly so far in these first few days. How would you compare and contrast then and now?
Well, let's start with the proposition itself, and then let's get to the
Okay.
procedures that are so off the wall. So, does it make sense for the United States to go to war to unseat this noxious regime in Tehran? To me, it's clear the answer is absolutely not. Right? I mean, the people ruling Iran, they're terrible. They kill peaceful protesters. They stir up hornets' nests around the region. They're bad actors. Absolutely, a terrible regime, like many terrible regimes out there. But they're one of the extra troublesome regimes, and we don't like them. We have various interests in containing their ability to cause harm. The beginning and the end of our interest is containing the harm they can cause to our direct interests, and when it's possible, without going to war, to the interests of our allies. That's all there is to it. And frankly, I mean, wouldn't want to see Iran having a nuclear weapon, but the whole idea, I mean, bad regimes have nuclear weapons. North Korea has nuclear weapons. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. Pakistan, a longtime U.S. ally, although with a lot of problems in that relationship. So to begin with, there is no reason whatsoever for the United States to go to war with Iran, and there never has been. Now, the leadership of Israel has been trying to persuade the U.S. to join a war with against Iran since, at least to my knowledge, the days of George W. Bush. And every president until this one has rebuffed that as a ridiculous and reckless claim. Right? We don't go in and try and unseat governments that we don't like. It's just not it's not in our interest. It isn't done because it is toxically dangerous, right?
I mean,
And
there's just a huge track record of our country and others, but especially our country, getting rid of regimes we don't like and having them replaced by regimes that are worst in recent history, right? I mean,
and even, I mean, I think it's really important to say, even if it were going to, like, quote unquote work from the vantage point of like a regime change proponent, like, I guess there are people, fans of Kissinger, or of our wars in Latin America, who would say, from their vantage point, that killing Allende and putting Pinochet in charge of Chile worked from an American interest. I would say even those things, which I think those were the wrong thing. That's the wrong thing to do. Also, those things ruined us as a society by dint of doing those interventions, and they broke those societies that we intervened in and made them poor allies and poor partners and bad places to live. Right. So even when they supposedly work, they don't work. And what you're mentioning in our recent history is that it's a murderous disaster. It's a bloodbath. We create power vacuums. I mean, Iran today, to the extent that it's a problem, a security threat in the region that it's in, it's because we went in and destroyed Iraq. So until 2003, Iran and Iraq balanced each other out. They might not have been great places to live for the people who live there, but they really didn't have much bandwidth to cause problems beyond their borders. Fast forward to the annihilation of the Iraqi state by the bumbling U.S. invasion and occupation, and suddenly Iran is supercharged. They gain access to all the resources of Iraq, which they brilliantly leveraged. And with over the course of 20 years, thanks to American ineptitude, overreach, and forever wars, we turned Iran into a regional power that, by the way, was not a threat to American interests. I mean, that's the thing to keep hammering. As bad as Iran was, and I, as someone who lived in the region and saw a lot of people suffering at the hands of Iran supported militias, and bad Iranian policy, I am not sympathetic. I don't think of Iran as some kind of global resistance avatar that should be admired by progressives. Iran was a terrible dictatorship. However, not a direct threat to the United States, and by no means a state that we needed to invade in order to keep ourselves safe.
I don't want to simplify the history of Iran and Iraq. Everybody knows about their disastrous war where millions died, on both sides. But it would seem that the worst foreign policy or geopolitical consequence of the U.S. invasion in Iraq in 2003 should always be mentioned, and you just touched on it, was that it empowered Iran in a way it never would have been, because Iraq and Iran, to simplify it, kept each other in check to a certain extent. But when the U.S. invaded and got rid of Saddam and his Ba'athist friends, there was a lot of sympathetic people in Iraq to Iran, I think, because of ethnic loyalties to some extent, right? I mean, like, nothing empowered Iran more than the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And then add to that a hard-fought negotiation between that the Obama administration got, John Kerry and Wendy Sherman and all these other people who are outspoken today talking about that agreement, was ripped up by Trump, and Trump won. So the history, the recent history, seems to matter just as much as anything else. How am I doing?
And bringing this up, I think raises a really important point for progressives, right? So, I'm a progressive. I'm a universalist. I believe in every human being has equal rights to life and prosperity and security. No one by dint of the country they were born in has less of a right to live free from war and free from hunger. These are free from genocide, right? These are important values for me. And I'm in my mid 50s, early 50s. So I came to political consciousness at a time when the Cold War was ending, and we were watching genocides unfold in Rwanda, in Bosnia, and other places. And many of us thought the United States should use its power, including its military power, for good, to stop these genocides and to help and to help suffering people in bad states, right? So the sovereignty of foreign states was not the be all to end all. You wouldn't say, like, well, if some state is slaughtering members of one of its communities wholesale, we don't say, well, the sovereignty of foreign nations is the supreme value, so we just have to stand by and watch it happen. Now, it turns out it doesn't work. Our experience intervening, and arguably the times we did intervene, or that other countries intervened supposedly to protect people from war crimes or genocide, in each specific case you could argue it wasn't really sincere. It was because some other interest came into play. But I would say that the case was tested, right? The idea, in some cases, Bosnia, Rwanda, Somalia, Kosovo, there was at least some element of like good faith in why those interventions were made, and they did not work. They did not lead to good outcomes. But what they did lead to was a hubris that that underwrote the forever wars after 9/11. And as an American, I mean, it's not my place to say whether Iraq is better off from an Iraqi perspective. That's it's their life to make a judgment on. I can say as an American that what we did to Afghanistan and what we did to Iraq, we absolutely shouldn't have done. In the case of Afghanistan, after decades of war, we left the people of Afghanistan right back under the thumb of the Taliban, and with all the worst predations that were in place right before 9/11. And in Iraq, it's a much richer country, and for some Iraqis, it's a much safer country today. There is an amount of accountable governance in place. So some Iraqis I know say that what they have now is worth the price they paid in blood, but I can say that was not our job. That was not our role to play.
Well, it's not where it wasn't worth it for us then, and it certainly isn't worth it now.
It isn't the right thing to do. I mean, right? Like, if you could say to me that we could commit a bunch of war crimes in Iran, and you had a crystal ball and you told me that as a result, in 10 years, the average Iranian will be better off, I would say, I'm glad if that's the case. We should not invade that country and kill a bunch of people in order to create the possibility of some kind of positive change, especially when history tells us for sure that what we're really creating is the likelihood of a lot of chaos. So there's maybe a 20% chance of something good coming out of this. There's an 80% chance of something terrible coming out of this.
Yeah, very well said. I think the most important thing I've learned is that Americans unfortunately just don't care, and it's because we don't have to. We don't see the cost of war. Less than 1% of Americans serve. We can do whatever we want, and it doesn't affect our lives. There's no draft. There's no national service. We don't see the financial extent of it, at least not directly. It gets all put on the credit card, and therefore we can continue to have these military interventions and wars. But even if there continued to be no direct costs, and I think our time runs out on that, even if that was to continue, you would still want to have majority support for any kind of intervention.
What do you make of the polls that show that this time around? So, in the Iraq War 2003, this is, by the way, one of my favorite tidbits. Not only did people believe the lies, but to this day, the majority of Americans believe that Saddam had nuclear weapons and was connected to the 9/11 attacks. Two things which are not true and were provably not true. But anyway, what do you make of the polls now, which show that less than a quarter of Americans support this war? Does that give you any hope, or how do you interpret that?
It gives me a lot of hope, because it's what I thought would be the case. You have to sell any idea that you want, whether it's a true idea, a lie, or demagoguing immigrants or not. You still have to sell it. This was not sold. Like, you have to sell the American people a major military intervention.
No idea, no plan. They just did it. They're just winging it.
But I also think that on this issue, Americans are somewhat emboldened because when Trump won, week one or something, he just kills their top general, and there's hardly any consequences or repercussions. Then last year, we bombed the shit out of the mountains where their nuclear weapons are apparently are. Again, no consequences or blowback from the Iranians against Americans. We just went about our lives. And I think because of those two interventions, and then add Venezuela and how, quote, well that went at just kidnapping arguably a terrible guy, but another world leader, and just letting his deputy take over and things go on. We take their oil too.
I mean, I think Trump's a terrible president. I would not appreciate some foreign country sending its commandos in and kidnapping him out of the White House and taking him and putting him on trial in their country. So if you think about it that way, and I mean, I don't know, maybe some of your listeners wouldn't mind if that happened, but.
Well, my point though is all of those interventions, this guy's attacked just about he's attacked several countries no other president has, including Nigeria, I believe. And there haven't been consequences or costs to the American people. The only thing I can think of right now, 6 Americans have died. Trump doesn't care. He's looking at the curtains. Just said this is what happens. It's unbelievable. He's partying. Like, if any other president did any of those things, we would be outraged. But the thing that seems to be a game changer to some extent is if you close down that Strait of Hormuz, if oil goes up to $80 or $100 and Americans start seeing the price, then they will care. Or if there's a higher loss of life, then they'll start to care. But I'm not that cynical, but I just think that's the truth about Americans' apathy and lack of interest, and the fact that there haven't been consequences in these previous military interventions by this president. What are your thoughts?
So yeah, I mean, I want to draw a line from the police occupation of Minneapolis and the sort of police state brutality of the roundups of, I mean, I was going to say roundups of immigrants, but it's just roundups of people, you
You
know,
don't think anybody? Yeah, just
people who have the wrong skin hue in the wrong place. I think Americans are getting are starting to get a feeling that this project is related and it's not a good one to live under. Like we like, I think, I hope we like our democracy, we like our rights. There are people on the right who have some libertarianism of principle. Not a lot of them, it seems, but that's a type that exists. There are bedrock, Bill of Rights principles that we are trotting over in a way that I don't think actually has ever happened in American history, that we've had this kind of regression, right? I mean, we began as a nation with rights for some, not for all, but the arc over time has been to increase who gets those rights. And this is like I think the most acute period of backsliding we've
yeah,
ever had.
it's a big back. It's a pretty big step backwards. I can't think of another time, certainly not in our lifetimes, where we took rights away. You used to think, the political argument is if you give somebody something, it's really, really hard
I
to
mean,
take.
the only analogy, and I don't think it's exactly analogous, is what happened in Reconstruction, right? Where briefly at the end of the Civil
Right,
War, Black
right.
Americans got
But in
close
our
to equal
life,
rights, and then they had them taken away by Jim Crow. And maybe that's how we should see this, as an attempt to interrupt the arc of democracy. But listen, I mean, so I think it's crazy that we have people in Congress who are upset about the procedures. They're basically like waving around Robert's Rules of Orders and saying, like, we're really upset that you didn't ask us about this war, but like, of course, if you asked, we'd say yes. That's sort of the subtext. And like the correct position here for any American is we should not be in this war, and now that we're in it, we should stop it immediately. So if you're in Congress, you should use the power of the purse or any other power you have to stop the war now. Yes, it's very important that we go back to having a real Congress that has teeth and will exercise war powers, because as you know, and most people who care about this issue know, it's only Congress that has the authority to declare war. You wouldn't know that based on the last 26 years,
Congress
where
has given up its authority not only on declaring war during our lifetimes, right? But I mean, the power of the purse, they've given up all authority, the Republicans in Congress, to their commander in chief. I mean, they're not doing their job as it is spelled out in the Constitution clearly.
but that's the power that exists, and I think that, I mean, this is such a like radically unnecessary war. And I
Right.
think the way it's going to unfold is that people are watching, and they're going to see we're the thugs, right? We, like, Americans like to think of themselves as the city on the hill, the free society that people around the world look to, that people want to immigrate here because it's such a great free place. And now we're looking around, Europe is scared of us, the Caribbean is scared of us, Latin America is scared of us, with good reason, right? They're wondering which which fishermen are going to be blown out of the water by the US Navy, which country is going to suddenly find itself being bombed by America, or in the case of this war, caught in the crossfire. So right, we're bombing Iran, but now Kuwait and the Emirates and Saudi Arabia are having their airports bombed and their shopping malls bombed and luxury hotels and American CIA offices. But the point is, these countries didn't ask for this war, and they're caught up in it too. And this is us setting the fire. We're the arsonists in the world order. And for someone who came of age in a generation where, when I was 20, I thought American idealism was a real thing. I thought we had some juice that was, I mean, my parents emigrated to this country because it really was a better place to live than the country they grew up in. Now, it's telling that the reason for that is that there was a dictatorship in Greece that was put in place by the CIA, and that is why they left. So, it's not in a way, it's the cycle goes around. But nonetheless, I thought we meant these things that we stand for, and I think a lot of Americans do, right? I think a lot of
A
Americans,
lot of
especially people
Americans
who
do.
aren't in power, believe in these ideas.
Yeah, but a lot of Americans also believe in hegemony. How do you pronounce it?
I
Whether
would
they,
pronounce it hegemony, but I mispronounce a lot of words.
however they pronounce that word, and whether or not they know the definition of it, a lot do believe in it. That hubris is a huge part of America, this generation's DNA, and I don't know why, because we keep fucking losing everywhere we go, but yet there still doesn't seem to be, again, my thesis, I guess, a cost for Americans. Do you think that this invasion there will be a cause? Everybody's talking about potential sleeper cells and terrorist attacks. They're talking about any number of issues that could affect us. Obviously, the price of gas and everything else. Do you think that Americans are going to pay any cost for our latest war that we've started?
So I think we're going to pay a lot of costs, and I think that this time we're going to connect the dots more easily than we have in the past. So
Mm.
there's I was going to find the link to share in here, but there's actually a group that's set up a cost of the war in Iran as a running ticker already. And it's in the billions, and I'll send you that link in a minute.
I'll find it.
So there is a literal dollar cost, right? That is, I think, as of today, we've already spent more on the bombs we've dropped than the cost of the ACA subsidies that were withdrawn this year, right? So there is a literal opportunity cost for Americans of things we need that the government would fund, and instead we are literally blowing up that money in the form of these weapons that are being dropped. I think there's another cost that's going to be very visible to people, which is all these troops being diverted from actual security threats. So this isn't the time of right after 9/11 where the biggest threat on the horizon was Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. We have Russia at war in Ukraine. We have China eyeing an invasion of Taiwan. We have what I would call real traditional state threats that actually are a concern, and the reason to have a military is to be able to defend against those threats and deter powerful bad actors. And instead we are squandering all that power. So we're burning our values and our credibility, and we're also very literally putting all this material into a war of choice that strategically doesn't matter, but at the end of it, we have no interceptors left. We're going to have no Tomahawk missiles left. We're going to have lost a lot of ability and know-how and reach. And meanwhile, so we're exposed at a moment where the world is a much more dangerous place, and it's more dangerous because of things we've been doing, right? I mean, why is the world a more dangerous place today? It's because we have dismantled the system of alliances that actually was pretty good at keeping not just America, but everybody safer, right? Today, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, Europe is wondering if we're going to invade Greenland. That is not a good basis for shared security, right? And I like NATO, I like the EU, I like our partnership with it because maybe bad things happen at the margins, but it means that something like World War II is less likely to happen. Today, because of Trump's set series of invasions of last year, World War III is a distinct possibility. And I hate to say that, but I think it's true.
What do you think happens in Iran right now? I mean, it is a pretty big country. It has been through obviously a lot. There have been many protesters were killed recently. But as I've heard from a lot of analysts, there's not really an apparatus to take over. If Trump says, put down your guns and you can have immunity, well, who's going to pick them up? And the person that picks them up might shoot the guy who put it down. Why would he want to put it down? None of it makes any sense at all. And I just can't figure out what could possibly happen as a result. We were led to believe that Iran was a lot stronger than Iraq. Iraq, we did a pretty bad job on and lost miserably, but Iran would be so much worse. So far, like I said, it doesn't seem to be
well. Let's not confuse Iran's ability to cause long-range strategic damage to the world's most powerful military, with Iran's power, the Iranian regime's power to survive and exert control domestically over its own country, right? So the Iranian state is a very like institutionally deep, effective, powerful state with real like administrative power and capacity, real human capital, and considerable loyalty, right? I mean, we spend a lot of our time as progressives or journalists or reformers talking to folks who don't like the regime, but there are a lot of Iranians who do like the regime, right? I mean, maybe they're 1/3 of the population, something less than half, but you know what? They're the people who are in the Besiege, they're in the IRGC, they're the people who go out and beat up and kill demonstrators and have beaten back every reform movement that's happened. They're a real constituency. Those people are going to fight for the regime. And if you sort of use the Iraq lens as a cautionary tale, Iraq, which had almost no loyalty and it's in a state that was in tatters and had been in tatters for decades, was still able to generate multiple resistances, both
Right.
against the U.S. but also against the new Iraqis who came to be in charge. In Iran, there's guaranteed to be a very sizable reactionary component that's going to be pro-regime, even if elements of the regime collapse. So I think in the best case scenario, we have some kind of transition that involves a lot of deadly civil strife. And I think the more likely scenario, you have something that's more like a civil war.
Sounds bad. I can't imagine the United States government, the United States military sending troops into Iran. Can you see that?
I mean, I would say in normal times, of course not. That would be insane. But I mean, look, we heard it from the horse's mouth. I think Marco Rubio said either yesterday or today, the president hasn't ruled anything out. He
Right.
hasn't ruled. He was asked about boots on the ground. He said the president hasn't ruled it out.
Right.
These people are so reckless, and look, they don't care about the lives and well-being of Iranians. They don't care about the lives and well-being of American
They
soldiers
don't.
and
They don't. They've
service
proven
members, right? They don't care. I mean, the
use them.
cavalierness with which Trump referred to the Americans who've already died is unbelievable, right? I mean, it's like in the taxonomy of dishonorable things that have been done. It's like maybe it's not the top one because there's been such disregard for human life, but it's shocking, right? I mean, it's shocking that in an America where there is a deeply held reverence for life, at least for American life, right? Even like
Yeah.
America Firsters or hyper nationalists, they they mourn Gold Star families. This guy doesn't. He doesn't care about Gold Star families.
Suckers
He
and
doesn't care about
losers.
anybody.
Suckers and losers is how he sees them. Less than all
And
the
us
time.
too. I think we too, as sort of stand-in Americans, are viewed as dispensable suckers and losers in the calculus. But for now, we still have free elections in this country. I mean, that's under threat, but we do have free elections, and I do think there's an interesting and significant blowback against this utter disregard for democratic practices and for American values.
Love talking to you. Learned a lot. Learned a lot reading your stuff before we talked, and really enjoyed this conversation. I could go on and on, but I know I've already gone too long. Let's do it again. I hope
Yeah, great talking to you. Thanks for having me on.
some more people from the Century Foundation as well about some domestic issues and anything else. So put me in touch with folks. But we all thank you for your expertise, your wisdom, your clarity, and your moral clarity, especially. I mean, I think that's a really important thing these days when we're talking to experts and analysts. And I think the point you made at the early part of the conversation about we have to make sure that we all treat each other with a similar sense of humanity. And that too often gets lost right at the beginning of any debate and conversation, and it should be at the forefront. So thank you for centering it. Thank you for being here.
Let's
Yep.
stop this war. Let's get this war stopped.
Whatever we can do. Tried the last two as best I could. Got really connected to a whole bunch of veterans and their families, and that affected my life in a way that will always be indelible. Will always matter a lot to me. And so I don't want to see another generation of families broken that way here or anywhere else. Thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate you.
Take care. Thanks.